I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you guys can see it. So by way of kind of quick introduction to this topic, my career was almost all technical. I spent about 20 years, 10 or 15 of those at Dell. Most of it was in kind of customer service and customer support. Kind of went up the ranks, hi, thank you for calling Dell. How can I help? Was like my first job in like 1993 or something like that. And then when I left in 2010, I was in a project management role inside of marketing. And when I left, so I'd never had any kind of sales, didn't know anything about networking. In fact, my only reference to networking was kind of multi-level marketing, which is not necessarily good or bad. It is what it is. And so that was my only thought of networking. So when I had a severance package and left Dell and kind of took a little bit of a sabbatical. And then when I started to kind of get back into what do I want to do with my life, I'm sitting at home and, I kind of put the shingle out. I was doing IT consulting and some coaching and things of that nature. And I just expected my phone to ring. Amazingly enough, because at Dell, my phone just rang. I'm sitting at the desk and the phone rings, and, people thought I was a good guy and popular and could solve their problems and life was good. But when I put my shingle out, my phone was not ringing. And I was, sad and broke and hungry and frustrated and everything else, and was having a cup of coffee with one of my friends. And he said, John, how many new people have you met, this week or this month? And I was like, well, I haven't really met anybody new. And he challenged me to take on and go meet 100 new people and have 100 cups of coffee with 100 new people. That was probably one of the most fundamentally life-changing events, was going through this process and meeting all of these people. And out of that, I've kind of developed a little bit of a technique about making the right connections. How do you network with people? How do you have those cups of coffees? How do you make connections with the right kinds of people? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So very quickly, by way of show of hands, if this is you, would be kind of interested to hear what our audience is. So, why are you here at this group? Were you recently, laid off or fired? New job, new to the city and looking for a job? Anyone bored at their current job? No one's bored at their current job. Reached a ceiling where they currently are, or maybe a senior executive looking to do a confidential search. So my guess is that probably, each of you sort of land somewhere in here. And what I've found is a lot of the challenges that people have is you've either been internally promoted and you don't know how to do an external job search. You're not a networker. You're like me. You've never done networking before and you don't know how to do it. Or maybe you are a networker, but you don't know how to use it for your job search. And in short, you're maybe a little bit overwhelmed and scared. So that's what we're going to kind of help you with tonight. So first question, and I don't know if you guys are muted or unmuted, but if you can unmute yourself, how long should a job search last? Anyone have thoughts and ideas? And I have 7 kids, and if you don't participate, I will call you.
Until you find a job.
Until you find a job. That's excellent. Who else?
Not very long.
Not very long. Okay. Who else?
It should never end.
Oh, I like that. Well, I went to the god of Google, and I asked, how long should a job search last? And I know I've heard this before, and they say, oh, it's 1 month for every $10,000 that you plan to earn. I just want to first off say, if you've heard that or you're in this thing, that's really a total myth. So if you're expecting your job search to last 1 month for $10,000, like there's something really, really wrong with that process. So hopefully what you learn tonight will significantly increase that. It's amazing how much bad information is on the internet. That being said, you do need to kind of weigh the cost of a job search, and there is a real cost. So if you're at $150,000 every week that you go without work, and if you have wives, I might not have to tell you this because my wife knew exactly what the number was every single week, but $28.85 a week for a $150,000 job is what that search is costing you. Now, while it shouldn't take a month per $10,000, I will tell you that this right here is what people spend the majority of their time in their job search. And I'm going to give you this as a bonus. It's not directly about the networking, but it actually is fundamental to the networking. And it is developing your true north. And by that, what I mean is you need to understand, where are you going? What does that look like? And so what I like to tell people is they need to be able to complete this sentence. And the sentence is, I solve X pain for Y kind of organizations by doing Z. So what's the pain that you solve? Because the only reason that you get hired and the reason that you get paid what you get paid is because of a pain that you solve. Nobody is hired because they're a nice person. They're hired because they can solve a pain. Number two, understanding the type of organization that you work for, you solve that pain. So I'll give you kind of an example. You may be someone who is a very detail-oriented person, and you organize things, and let's say you're the kind of person that really makes sure that that warranty and recall notifications, every time that you buy something, you fill out the little warranty card, and when there's a recall done, you're the first to go in and get it done. And that's really what you do well. You've got a lot of skill sets for that. To most people, to most businesses, that probably is not a big enough pain. To most businesses, warranty repair and recall notifications is not going to be something that's going to move their radar. But what if you were an orthopedic surgeon and you had put a bunch of steel plates in a bunch of people, and now all of a sudden the manufacturer has set out a recall notice? All of a sudden your skill set, your pain that you solve for that organization, is a multi-million-dollar pain that you solve. So the thing that you do, the pain that you solve, one organization may not value that pain, but another organization, you can do the exact same thing, and they place an extreme value on it. So again, the point here is, make sure that you're looking at your audience, your organization, and what do they see as a pain. So what pain do you solve? What kind of organizations do you solve that pain for? And then what is it you do? Put some meat and potatoes on that, by doing Z. This is the stuff that I do. This right here is what I have found takes the most time for people to kind of get through this. I'll simply say, the clearer that you are on your true north, the better that your networking and your connections are going to be as you get this. So let's go ahead and go on to the different types of connections that you can make. So we're going to talk about 4 different connections or groups that we have in our job search strategy. So the first is going to be direct contacts at targeted companies. So we're going to talk about reaching out to specific named individuals at targeted companies. How do you do that? How do you find out who they are? How do you find out what their contact information? Then we're going to talk about executive recruiters. What do they do? What do they care about? How you can get in front of them. The third one is private equity lenders. I'm going to talk about some of their unique needs, and again, unique way to approach them. And then the fourth group is our friends and families. If you're kind of new to the job search, this is typically the first people that you go to. Your first network is those friends and families, those colleagues, those coworkers that you've worked with, and they can be extremely helpful in finding you and helping you define your true north. So when you're going to your friends and your family, one of the best things that they can help you do is some of that introspection. What is the pain that you solve? Todd and I can talk about, hey, remember when we solved this problem at Dell? We may curse a little bit, we may cry in our beer a little bit, but we can kind of remember those old war stories. Well, those war stories are what's going to help us to define the pain, the type of organization. So as you're meeting with your friends and families, especially if you're kind of, not clear on that true north, that's a great way to use them to help you define who they are, because they probably know you. They can see some things. Sometimes, the sword cuts both ways. We either think that we know too much and we sort of overvalue our skills, or we undervalue our skills. And so our friends have a great way to kind of level set what is a true strength, what that value is, and maybe some things are like, yeah, actually, no, that's not something that you're good at. They can be very honest with us. Once your true north is defined, help your friends help you. This is another thing that you have to be very aware of, and I'm just going to kind of speak very bluntly. Your friend might be your best friend in the whole wide world. You've known him since you were frat brothers in college, and he loves you, and you go to church together. But at the end of the day, he's busy. She doesn't have time, and you've got to help them help you. So have a follow-up plan so that when you meet with these people, you have your resume, your cover letter, what I call a forwardable email. So, hey, Mitch, it was great meeting with you. Remember that time we were at Dell and we did XYZ? Hey, sure would like to have you introduce me to Bob over at XYZ company. Make it simple, make it easy, because the reality is once that meeting is over with your best friend, 30 seconds later, they're like everybody else and they're busy, and they may love you to death, but they're busy. So, help them help you. One of the best ways that you can do that is you can ask for LinkedIn recommendations. So in LinkedIn, you can, there's a set of recommendations. Now is a great time to have those people say, remember when we did this or that, and have them put that in to your LinkedIn recommendation. Now, when you, again, in the vein of helping your friends help you, it's always good to kind of plant those seeds, remind them of that project that you worked on, remind them of the results that you had when you were working on this project, because what you want out of a recommendation is a combination of both good guy and specific results. So, a recommendation just says, hey, John's a great guy. I loved him. He's real friendly. He's real outgoing. I mean, that's nice, but I also need to know, and John, when we worked on Project X, John solved this problem. John generated this revenue. John, led this team. So again, when you're asking for recommendations, help them. Most of our friends will write the good guy part of the recommendation. Most people will kind of be more than happy to sort of do that. Give your friends some bird seeds, some ideas, remind them of what you worked at so they can actually put some tangible meat on that recommendation about the actual problem that you solve. And then the last thing, when you're meeting with them, always be respectful of their time. Again, this is your best friend from college. They're busy. If coffee or lunch is appropriate, that's fine. But right now with Zoom or a phone call, frankly, a 30-minute Zoom call can be extremely powerful. So just be respectful to kind of balance what you're asking from them and what they're able to give to you. in some cases, there's kind of nothing worse than sort of sitting down and, you've kind of had like an hour and a half coffee with somebody and you don't really feel like you were able to give them anything. So just be respectful of people's times. And again, especially your friends and your families. Try to have an agenda. Obviously, if you truly have known this person, be authentic, be who you are, but be respectful of their time because they're very, very busy. Okay, so going now from friends and family, kind of use that first. The other three are going to follow a very similar pattern to how you reach out and you connect with the other three. So this is all going to be about building top of mind awareness. So if you're going to have a marketing background, it's TOMA, T-O-M-A, and it's all about how do you get to know someone and build that top of mind awareness. So the general process is you're going to take the specific contact, the targeted contact. So this is a person. This is Michael Dell at Dell Computers, whatever it is, and you're going to reach out and you're going to touch them in 5 different ways. So the first is you're going to introduce yourself to them. And I actually recommend this introduction is done via an old-fashioned paper letter in the mail, introduction letter. Hi, my name is John. Heard a lot about your company. Here's some of my things that I've worked on. You're going to be hearing more from me later. So your introduction letter has very little call to action. In fact, it really doesn't have a call to action at all. It's just a place. It's just a bird seed that you're landing, and it's landing in their desk in a unique way by email or by mail, by letter. A few days after that introduction letter, you're going to start with the core of your marketing material, and that's going to be your pain letter and your resume. Now, I call the cover letter or the introduction the pain letter. And again, that's just going to come down to, I solve this pain, and use that as your cover letter to really start telling a story. And I know you guys are going to talk about resume writings with some other people, but that's where you're going to send them a pain letter and your resume. Then the next contact is going to be a phone contact to them, and then an email, and then a LinkedIn connection. So you're going to touch them 4 or 5 different ways and different times. Now, again, these are targeted contacts. One thing that I do want to note here, sort of in another bonus, is I'll simply say this. If your resume kind of looks like the resume on the left, like something that only a computer would read, that's probably not a good cover letter or a good pain letter and a resume. Don't be afraid to put your picture in. In fact, we are made to interact with people and faces. That's an extremely powerful connection. And by the way, if you see here down here in the bottom half, look at this. This is a recommendation. This is a third-party testimonial of how great Sam is. Now, just curious, where do you think Sam got this recommendation from? He got it because he asked her to write a LinkedIn recommendation. So she wrote a LinkedIn recommendation, and he then incorporated that into the resume. Again, this is no different. You got to think marketing. If you're trying to think how to get through computers and automated tracking systems, that really is a very small piece of it. You've got to think, how do I get in front of a real live person? By the way, where do you think I got this picture of this lady? I got it from her LinkedIn profile. Again, extremely powerful. Look at all the commercials that you read. Look at all the magazine ads that you read. All of the online funnels for whatever's happening on LinkedIn, all of them have this component of a third-party testimonial. And it really just starts by asking people for LinkedIn recommendations. So again, this is kind of a bonus. Make your resume, make your pain letter look like a marketing piece. If your wife is bored reading your resume, you need to spice it up a little bit. Don't be afraid to spice it up. At the end of the day, there is a human being that needs to read that resume and that pain letter. Okay, So now let's talk about the specific people and how you're going to reach out to them. So in these direct contacts at targeted companies, what I want each of you to do is to identify a handful. So 30 to 40 specific companies, specific people that you're interested in. So again, not 3 or 400, not 3 or 4, but a handful, 30 to 40. These are your why organizations. So again, going back to, are you looking for, a big Fortune 100 company? Are you looking for a startup? What does that company look like? Those are the kinds of people who would likely be the point of contact, and we'll get into that on the third point, aim high. If you don't have a subscription to Austin Business Journals or whatever, if you're getting one from outside of Austin, bizjournals.com is a great resource. It's published weekly. It's kind of a weekly newspaper. It's a great way to kind of get intelligence information, what's going on, who's who in Austin, what businesses are hiring, and kind of with every list or with every issue, they sort of have a list. It's either the top realtors or the biggest executive recruiters or whatever the list is. Just every week is a list after a list. And then they publish each year their book of lists. And so this is a great place to identify those up and coming companies, those targeted companies. You can go down to the library. even my Pflugerville library, and you can get that book of lists. It's a great place to start and identify 30 or 40 people that you want to reach out to. Now, when you're identifying the context, I would recommend that you aim high. If you really are a senior executive, aim for that senior VP, aim for that CEO, that chief HR officer. Don't be afraid to go high. I can tell you from personal experience that everyone in executive leadership is always thinking about who's on their team, who's leaving, who's coming, what do they need. And even though they may not be the one that you're going to report to, they are very good at forwarding emails. So again, if your contact is resonating with the pain, if you've done your job, identifying the pain that you solve, tying that connection, if you hit that CEO is very good at forwarding to the right vice president that you would be the fit for. And now what happens when that vice president gets that email on their desk that says, hey, check this out from the CEO? They're going to do it. So a whole lot easier to work top down than bottom up. Okay. So if you're not sure, if you don't have a connection, aim high. They're good at forwarding information. They do that all the time. They're very, very good at that. With these direct contacts, follow that approach. You're going to introduction, pain letter and resume, phone call, email, LinkedIn contact. Follow that route. Follow that 5-step approach. Should take you about 3 to 5 weeks tops to go through those 5 steps. The next type of contact is executive recruiters. So again, you may want to use the business journals to identify who are the top 5 to 10 executive recruiters. And just by the way, if you guys haven't worked with recruiters, there's essentially 2 flavors of recruiters. There's what's called retained search, and then there's contingency. So the contingency search firms, typically they are recruiting for sort of a pool of categories. So they may be recruiting for developers or customer service techs or things of that nature. Typically, contingency firms will typically kind of go up to about the 125 to 150 range. They typically stop recruiting at that range. Now, caveat, if you're actually a technical programmer, they may go a little bit higher than that, but they're effectively looking for tactical, skill-based people. And the way they get compensated is if they fill a role, the company pays for them. So they have this contingency relationship with the firm. And oftentimes, companies will have multiple contingency firms that they work with that they accept resumes from. The executive or the retained search firms, those guys are typically looking for, well, they're looking for specific jobs. So not kind of a group of engineers or developers or customer service. They're really looking for, a specific director of customer success, a specific COO. The company has engaged them. They have a contract, and they're going to get paid for that job. So that's kind of, and they typically will start at roles about 125 to 150 and go all the way up from there. So that's a little bit of a difference. So if that's kind of where you are in a salary, and if you're looking for leadership, you're going to want to focus with retained search firms or executive recruiters. Again, you can use biz journals. If you go to the Austin Business Journal, it'll tell you, here's the top 15 retained search firms in Austin. They run hot or cold, okay? The key to know about them is they find people for jobs, not jobs for people. So again, companies hire them to do a search for a specific job. Now, these guys are going to be, if you meet them, if you run into them at a networking event or whatever, they're going to be the nicest people. They're going to love you. They're going to have, they're going to be super nice to you. But at the end of the day, and if they are actively recruiting for a job that you're a fit for, they're going to jump right all over you, and it's going to be wonderful. If they don't have a job that's a good fit for you, again, they're going to be nice and they're going to be wonderful, but once you leave, they don't care. So again, they run hot, cold. So when I was working for a retained search firm, we would typically do, I think, 20 or 30 searches a year. And we just never knew what it was. I mean, one search could be for a CIO. The next search could be for general counsel. The next search could be for, an engineer with a lot of patents. So, everyone, they're hired to find people for a specific job. Now, I would say, because they are, geared to, they know exactly what they're looking for. They know exactly who their clients are. You can skip a couple of the steps. So you don't really have to send them an introduction letter. You can kind of skip that step, send out your paying letter. You don't really have to follow up with a phone call, follow up with an email, follow up with a LinkedIn connection request. So you can kind of skip the introduction step, and you can skip the phone step. When you look at the firms, you're going to want to target the partner or the consultant. Now, this is going to be a little bit counterintuitive. They will typically have a person called a recruiter. The recruiter is typically more of a junior level person that's just, churning through resumes and making pre-calls. The people that are actually interacting with their client, that is typically the partner or the consultant. They're the ones that know, all of the jobs that are in the pipeline and what's going on. So when you target the people in the firms, that's who you're looking to target, is their partner or their consultant, is typically the titles that they have. Private equity firms. So these are guys that have portfolios of companies. Similar to executive recruiters, they know exactly what they want. You can kind of skip the introduction letter. You can skip the phone call. If you're what they want, they know it. Here's the deal. For them, the only thing they care about is results matter. So these are typically, they're firms. They've spent, $1 million to $20 to $100 million buying some company. They maybe have a 3 to 5 year time horizon, and then they're looking to sell the company. Okay. So, if you're trying to grow into a role, don't waste your time with the private equity thing. I remember I had a conversation, I had coffee with a private equity firm. And at the time I was doing like leadership training and leadership coaching. And I was, talking to him about, hey, bring me in and I can help your staff become leaders and do all this cool leadership training. And he just laughed at me. He said, John, they better already be leaders. They better already know what they want to do. If they're still here, if I'm still here in 3 years, I have completely failed. I don't have any time to develop leaders and develop this stuff. I want people that have been there, done that, and results matter. So know that that's the mindset. But what's neat is these guys will typically have a portfolio of companies, anywhere from 5 to 15 or 20 companies that they're working with. By definition, the PE firm is funding them. So these are, usually companies that are, past sort of the angel investor and the initial kind of start. They've put in investments, so they have some funds to buy people or to hire people, and they're looking for rapid growth. Again, you can use your business journals. Go to Austin Business Journals. You'll find the top 10 private equity firms. You can go onto their websites. You can look what companies are in their portfolio. There's a tons of research that you can do very, very quickly to target, to do your homework and figure out how would you fit into their strategy. So again, what's the pain that they have? What are they looking to do? And how can you fit into that strategy? And I would recommend that when you reach out to them, that you target the partners at the firm. So here's what a job search or kind of these networks should look like. So this is what your expected results should look like. So if you go out and if you identify 40 to 60 contacts from these, 3 or 4 different groups of people, networks of people, and you touch them 3 to 5 times, right? So you've done the introduction letter, you've done the pain letter and resume and the phone call and the email all the way around. Out of that, you should end up with 4 to 6 conversations. And remember, that's what you're looking for here. You're not looking for a job. You're still kind of a step, don't get ahead of the process. You're looking for a conversation with these people. Okay. So if you do that, you should have, a 5 to 10% return, what I would call a qualified conversation, if I was just putting it in sales term. So if you did all of this, and this should take you again, 3 to 5 weeks to go through this process. So if you go through this process and you hit these 60 people, you touch them 5 times and you get nothing, you hear chirps. What do you think that means? It means one of 2 things are happening. I guess maybe 3. 1, your pain is not resonating. They simply don't have that pain, okay? Or number 2, you don't actually look credible in your ability to solve that pain. So if I say I'm a senior executive and I can take, companies public, and then my credentials show that I just graduated from college, 6 weeks ago, I'm not a credible candidate. So while I do want you to have marketing, I want you to think about your audience. I do not want you to inflate what you can and can't do. If at the end of the day you don't appear credible, they are going to ignore you. And I guess the third thing is you may, and especially if your focus is on larger organizations, Fortune 1000 companies, it may take a little bit for you to kind of figure out the right kind of people in the organization. So perhaps, you may have a great message, you may be credible, but you may just need to redetermine who you're sending that information to make sure that you're actually sending it to the right people. The beauty about this process, again, this took you 3 or 4 weeks to do it, and you've got that feedback loop. So the worst thing that can happen is you hear nothing. That should take you about 4 or 5 weeks to get that. And now it's one of those 3 things. Either I'm not solving a valid pain, the companies don't actually have that, or I'm hitting the wrong person in that company. So modify one of those things, go back through this process, and start over. So with that, I want to kind of open up any questions or thoughts about the process and the kinds of people to connect and what that looks like. So I'll open it up for you guys to chat.
John, this is Sarah. I posted this in the chat, but so I've been interviewing with a PE portfolio company for a specific open position.
Mhm.
And then I started reading more about the PE and their portfolio companies, and they have a ton of really quite amazing companies. Would it be super bad form to contact them saying, "Hey, I'm talking to the folks at company XYZ. I see you have company Nuco. Might there be something there?"
So let me just make sure you're talking already to one of the portfolio companies, but they are PE owned. I would
Yes.
absolutely do that. And again, be respectful, okay? But yes, hey, I'm interviewing to XYZ about this. I see that they are owned by you. You know, just again, be straightforward with it, but absolutely, because the chances are they have other positions in their portfolio that are very similar. I mean, these companies, they tend to buy, you know, the same kinds of things. So absolutely do that. Great question.
I was going to say, I received something in an email today. I forget if it was Austin NO or one of the other groups that publishes a summary of the day's activities. But they noted that there were 3 PE firms here in Austin that have their own job boards.
Yeah, in fact, actually, a lot of the PE firms, they essentially have executive recruiter firms inside of them. In fact,
Right.
I can tell you, I'm actually working with a client right now, and that's exactly what he's doing. The recruiting firm, it's a very large PE firm here in Austin, and their internal executive recruiting firm has reached out to this client of mine. So they, in many ways, they can operate very similar to a retained search firm.
Could you use the same strategy with maybe some of the smaller VCs? I mean, I have definitely, in the past, have invited myself basically along to lunch and gotten some, ad girls, but no traction.
So when you say VCs, are you really talking like angel investors, like individual people, or define for me what a VC is to you?
The smaller VCs in town here. I mean, and this was several years ago where, I don't know, I think it was pity lunches, but still, Live Oak,
Yep.
some smaller ones.
The answer is I would absolutely do the same kind of strategy with the smaller ones. Now, the true angel investors, the true kind of individual people, those are almost sort of a friends and family flavor, because typically, if you're truly in an angel investor phase of the company, you're very much bootstrapping things. Full disclosure, I actually work for a company that's a startup, and I would call us on, angel investor phase of it. So, if you want to ride that ride where it's all about sweat equity and those types of things, hey, I'm doing it, and I could have a whole conversation about that. But if you really are needing something a little bit more traditional, you probably need to be up the food chain from someone that's a true angel investor.
Yeah, and John, John Yates, sorry, it's Silverton Partners and ATX Venture Partners that they were talking about, and those are VC firms, right? They're not private equity. Or
I would use that terminology the same. I would use venture capital and PE as an interchangeable term. There may be some technical difference between them, but I think for the purposes of this conversation, they're the same thing.
Go where the money is, right?
They tend to know where it is. And again, if they've been attracted they already are wanting to accelerate something good that's happening with it. So that's, I mean, that's why that they're making their investment. And again, their time horizon is a 3 to 5 year time horizon. So, um, you know, bottom line, they want to grow their money anywhere from 4 to 8x on their investment. And they want to do it in 3 to 5 years. So that's the kind of growth. So if you've been in a type of organization where you can show those types of results, they will jump all over you because that's what they care about.
Hey, John. Can you speak a little bit about the timing and cadence on the messaging and the steps? I think that when you look at the steps, the contacts, that's four, 5 reaches to get to LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing the snail mail or messaging, that can take a little while. So you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, basically put about a 3 to 5 day break in each one of this. So introduction, 3 to 5 days later, pain letter, 3 to 5 days later, a phone call, 3 to 5 days, an email. Oftentimes, by the time you're over here, if you want to do email and LinkedIn simultaneously, that's, at that point, you really are kind of getting that final bite of the apple. So 3 to 5 days between these 3, and then kind of hit these 2 in parallel. And a lot of times, for emails, a lot of times you can guess. My email address at Dell was jonathan.schober@dell.com. So a lot of times you can make a guess of what their email is. Just, send an email and see if it bounces back. And you can usually 2 or 3 times you can figure it out. If that doesn't work, oftentimes when you have a LinkedIn, they'll once you're connected, you can typically find, if not their business email address, oftentimes they'll have their personal email address listed. So you can kind of modify that as appropriate.
John, is the goal to get to the LinkedIn connection, or is the goal to just touch them many times to have them, to be top of mind?
Well, both, right? So remember, the goal that we're looking for is a legitimate conversation, right? So that's what we're going to. So in the LinkedIn world, what that might look like is, one, when I send an invite for something like this, let me start, definitely pepper what you're doing. Hey, I'm looking at a job at your place, would love to connect with you. Okay. I mean, don't beat around the bush with it. Okay. And then when they accept that connection, again, kind of modify what your pain letter is, because you're going to basically put that in a LinkedIn message format, but it's the same thing. Here's the pain that I solve. I think it would help you here. Who could I talk to? So be direct. Don't beat around the bush. Tell them why you're connecting with them, and when they do, give them a little bit of meat to it. And again, if you're hitting on the right sound, they'll follow up with you. They'll say, yes, let's meet. They'll say, hey, don't talk to me, go talk to Bob. That kind of stuff.
Because I ask because I've been fairly successful at making LinkedIn connections with high-level people. When I make them, I'm probably 50% just, reaching out blindly. And I don't know if I need to spend the time doing the other things, or if I should just start the communications with those guys.
So again, one, I mean, making the connection is kind of, I would call that sort of step 1/2. Because I have found, look, I got tons of I'll accept just about every connection. I mean, unless they're just clearly, from, Chabakistan, looking for sales engine optimization, I'll pretty much accept any LinkedIn connection that comes my way. But do have a message, do have that follow-up, because you are trying to engage them in the conversation. Anecdotally speaking, right now, everything is crazy, and it's amazing what kind of conversations you can have with senior level people today that, January and February would have been crazy. We are kind of in this weird time period where everyone's trying to figure out new ways of doing things. So take advantage of it.
So what about using Twitter in addition to LinkedIn. How would that fit in there? Or not?
So that's it. So I would kind of consider that more in establishing yourself as thought leadership. I have not personally been very successful with making these kinds of connections in Twitter. Now, my only caveat is one of the things that I do is I do a couple of podcasts. I could do a couple of healthcare related podcasts, and I will find thought leaders in healthcare that have very active presence in Twitter, and I get a lot of my podcast interviews from reaching out to them and doing that type of a deal. But I have not been successful, and I've not seen a lot of success using Twitter in this kind of a deal. But that being said, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, kind of that thought leader position, every one of us should be creating some kind of content somewhere, whether that's I would probably, if I were going to pick, I would say LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter would be where I would sort of prioritize things. Again, your niche might vary, but I think that's where most of your people are in terms of a business context. But everybody, really, you should be writing something at least once a month. I mean, you should be writing at least 12 articles a year just to kind of, keep yourself in thought leadership, because the reality is they're going to read your LinkedIn stuff. They're going to look and they're going to see, and you will stand out. Again, once you've kind of crossed that salary range, we kind of laughed, we said, once you've crossed that 125 salary range, you're now a leader. And it's amazing. The difference between 125 and 250 has nothing to do with your skill sets. It has everything to do with your thought leadership, the way that you present yourself, your leadership capability. Just as an example, the resume that I showed here, this was kind of interesting. This guy, Sam, was actually a youth pastor. So went to college, was a youth pastor with a pastor. Everything was in the church world. If you don't have, well, I think we're all people of faith, so we probably know that pastors don't get paid very much. They certainly don't get corporate pay scale. He made a transition from pastoring to the corporate world. In fact, he actually ended up going to, he was like an assistant to the chief of staff for Dell. And it was all about the content that he'd done, the thought leadership that he had positioned. And that's what, from a salary and everything else, that made the huge difference. It really wasn't the skills that he had done. Once you make that leap, it's very easy to rapidly excel.
I think in the end, it's not what you do, but how you do it. A lot of times, right?
It is all about leadership. How you do it, how you lead. If you haven't read some of Patrick Lencioni, he has a great book called The Ideal Team Player. There's a company here, SellPoint, which is a big publicly traded company here. They are big Patrick Lencioni groups. In fact, I'll tell you that I have a 22-year-old son, and he just went through this process 6 weeks ago and landed a relatively senior level developer job at SellPoint. So it works, and it it works for 22, 42, 62.
Yeah. I guess just to wrap up, the reason I asked the question is I've heard over and over again that you can more readily access top tier individuals and organizations potentially through Twitter, because they're continually using Twitter to communicate.
Yeah, I would say my only caveat would be is typically the executives that are watching it are typically the marketing people. That's who's typically watching on Twitter. So, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But
So, John,
that being said, I know a lot of people that have got marketing jobs by responding to Twitter.
Yeah. So John, as we transition into our breakout groups, Do you have a prompt or a thing for us to think about or dialogue about in those sessions?
Wow, that is a great question. So what I would ask you to dialogue about is, again, I think there's two things. Really help each other understand what their true north is, and help each other kind of think, how could you find these networks? How could you find the different people in these groups? And then the third piece is, I'm just going to encourage you to take action. So if you're in an active job search, this is not something that needs to take, 10 or 15 months. This really is something that you can execute on, right now, very, very quickly.
This is Todd Boyum, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation of Fellowship Career Network. We meet every Monday evening from 6:30 to 8 p.m., and we hope you'll join us soon. To register and receive the Zoom link in your email, simply go to fellowshipcareernetwork.com today.